My son stood up at a crowded restaurant and called me a loser to my face. His mother, my ex-wife, said nothing. Her new husband just smirked. I didn't say a word either. I just went home. And by the following Monday, I had started the process of taking back everything I ever gave my son. The car he drove, the penthouse he lived in, and the company he thought he built. He was about to learn that a loser like me built his entire world, and a loser like me could tear it all down. My name is Malcolm Ridgway, a black man from Chicago, and at 70 years old I've learned that silence has many shades. There's the silence of peace, the silence of understanding, and the most dangerous silence of all, the one you use to muffle the roar inside. That night at a restaurant called the Velvet Spoon, I was using the third kind. This place was Carter Hale's territory. He was my ex-wife Lorraine's new husband. Everything about it was polished and tastelessly expensive, from the crystal chandeliers that hung like glass jellyfish to the clinking of silver against porcelain. Carter chose it, of course. It was a stage, and tonight it seemed I was the main attraction. My old suit, a Hart Schaffner and Marks I'd owned for 20 years, was perfectly tailored and immaculate, but it felt out of place in this sea of silk and cashmere. It was a suit of quality, not a flash. And in my son Darius's world, there was no room for anything that didn't flash. I could feel his eyes on me and those of his wife Tiana. They weren't looking at me. They were assessing me. Every time I took a sip of water, I saw Tiana's brow furrow slightly, as if the way I held my glass was further proof of my failure. Darius was busier. He was performing. He leaned back in his velvet-upholstered chair, one arm draped casually over the back, the other swirling a glass of red wine. It was a gesture he'd copied from Carter. "The company is exploding, Carter," Darius announced, his voice loud enough for the next table to glance over. "We just closed our second round of funding. Investors are lining up. Tiana's right. It's probably time I upgrade the 5 Series to a 7 Series. Tiana let out a little glassy laugh. "You deserve it, honey. You've worked so hard." I remained silent. I knew all about that second round of funding. I knew exactly where every single dollar came from, and it certainly wasn't from the line of investors Darius was imagining. Lorraine sat there with a tight smile plastered on her face. She had changed. 5 years with Carter had worn away the practical woman I once knew, replacing her with a pale imitation who worried if her handbag was last season. She looked at Carter with an adoring gaze, as if he had personally invented success. "Our son is brilliant, isn't he, Mal?" she asked, turning to me. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement, a silent comparison. "Our son is brilliant, unlike you." I just gave a slight nod and brought a piece of steak to my mouth. It was cooked perfectly, but I tasted nothing. All my senses were focused on the play unfolding before me. Carter, having let Darius have his monologue, finally spoke in his deep, patronizing tone. "Ambition is everything, Darius. Your father Malcolm is a good man, a fine engineer, but he lacks that spark. He builds things for other people, never an empire for himself. In this world, if you're not building, you're being buried." It was an insult wrapped in a backhanded compliment, a technique men like Carter perfected. Darius nodded eagerly, like a devout follower hearing a sermon. "Exactly. I've tried to explain that to Dad so many times, the importance of taking risks, of building a personal brand, but he just talks about savings and safe investments. It's so dated." Dated was the word he used. Last time it was cautious. The time before that, traditional. The words changed, but the contempt never did. The dinner continued, a steady stream of boasts. Darius talked about their penthouse apartment with its city views, their upcoming vacation to Bali, the new watch Tiana had bought him. Every story was a stone thrown into my silence. I was the wall they were bouncing their achievements off of just to hear the sound they made. Finally, as dessert was served, a 7-layer chocolate cake that likely cost more than my monthly utility bill, Carter signaled the waiter. "The check, please." "On my account." He said it casually, but his eyes flickered toward me. Another performance of power. That was the breaking point. Darius, maybe from the wine, or maybe just high on his own arrogance, suddenly stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. A few diners at nearby tables turned to look. "See, Darius said, his voice ringing out in the opulent room. He gestured from Carter to me. That's the difference. Dad, you're a loser. You've spent your whole life in that dusty old house on those dirty construction sites. Then he turned to Carter, his voice full of admiration. Carter is not. He's a winner. The air went thick. Tiana nodded smugly as if her husband had just spoken a great truth. Lorraine stared down at her plate, her silence a final act of betrayal. Even the people at the next table quickly looked away, their feigned ignorance a testament to my public humiliation. I looked directly into Darius's eyes. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little boy I taught to ride a bike, a hint of regret, but it was buried too deep beneath layers of designer clothes and entitlement. I said nothing. The rage I expected to feel never came. In its place was a cold, sharp clarity, a terrifying certainty. Slowly, I placed my white linen napkin on the table beside my untouched cake. I stood up. My chair made no noise. My movements were deliberate, measured. I glanced at Lorraine, at Carter, and finally at Darius. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. The heavy wooden door closed behind me, cutting off the sound, leaving them to their hollow victory. I didn't have to say anything. My actions were about to speak for me. The air outside was cold, but it cleared my head. I didn't hail a cab. I walked. The Gold Coast sidewalks slowly gave way to the quieter, more familiar streets near Bronzeville. My house stood under the shadow of an old elm tree, a solid 2-story brick home I designed and helped build myself 30 years ago. It wasn't flashy. It was durable like me. Inside, everything was in order. The smell of old mahogany and the paper from the books lining my shelves filled the air. This was my sanctuary, a world away from the phoniness I had just left behind. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour myself a drink. Anger clouds judgment. And tonight I needed to be colder than ice. I went into my study. It was a small room, but everything in it had a purpose. On the walls were blueprints of bridges and buildings I had helped create. Real things, things that last. On a corner of the desk, there was a silver-framed photograph. Darius, aged 5, wearing an oversized plastic construction helmet, grinning on my shoulders at a job site. His eyes then were full of pure pride and love. Where'd I lose that boy? The question hit me not as a sharp pain, but as a dull, weary ache that had been building for years. I had been too quiet. I had hoped my unconditional love would be enough. I was wrong. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional sacrifice. Tonight, the sacrificing ended. I sat down in my worn leather chair and turned on my old, slightly slow, but reliable Dell desktop. The screen glowed, illuminating my impassive face. I didn't browse the web or check my personal emails. My fingers moved with practiced ease, opening an encryption program I'd installed years ago. I typed in a long password, a string of letters, numbers, and symbols that no one else on Earth knew. A simple interface appeared on the screen with a list of folders. Their names were meaningless unless you knew what they really were. Ridgeway Holdings LLC, Harborview Properties LLC, DR Tech Solutions, Seed Funding Agreement Project, BMW 7 Series, Lease Contract, Carter Hale, Consulting, Payment Schedule. Each name was a thread, an invisible thread I had used to weave the world my son now lived in, the world he thought he had created himself. It was like being the engineer of a bridge. You can't see the rebar hidden deep inside the concrete, but without it, the entire structure would collapse. Tonight, I was going to begin a structural integrity test. I opened a secure email client. The recipient was already saved. Monica Ellis, a brilliant attorney, a friend I trusted with my life. Monica wasn't just my lawyer. She was the architect of the financial fortress I had quietly built. She knew every brick, every number. The email I wrote was short. No pleasantries, no long explanations. She would understand. Subject, initiate sunset protocol. Body, Monica, we need to meet tomorrow morning. Your office. 8 a.m. begin the dissolution process for all assets related to DR and associated parties. Priority 1, the vehicle. Malcolm. Sunset Protocol was the name we had given it years ago. A contingency plan for a day just like this. A day when the sun would set on an empire built on a lie. I hit send. A soft whoosh echoed in the silent room. It was done. The first domino was now perched at the edge of the table. I felt no satisfaction, no glee. I just felt a strange, quiet calm. The calm of an engineer who knows his design is about to undergo its final definitive test. I had built Darius's life. Now it was time to see if he could stand on his own once I took the scaffolding away. Monica Ellis's office sat on the 45th floor of a glass tower that overlooked Millennium Park. It was the kind of place that smelled of success, a mixture of expensive leather and freshly brewed coffee. But it never intimidated me. In many ways, I had helped build it. Monica greeted me not with a handshake, but with a familiar, weary smile and a heavy ceramic mug. "Morning, Mal," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I made the coffee the second I got your email. Black, no sugar. The way you drink it when you mean business." She was right. For 20 years, Monica had been more than my lawyer. She was my strategist, my confidant, the keeper of my secrets. She was the only person on earth who knew the full extent of the financial fortress I had built. I took the mug, the heat warming my cold hands. "Thank you, Monica." She gestured to one of the plush leather chairs opposite her enormous oak desk. She didn't sit behind it in her seat of power. She sat in the chair next to mine, making us equals. "I'll be honest, Mal," she said, her sharp eyes studying my face. When I saw the subject line, Sunset Protocol, my heart sank. I always hoped it was a plan we'd never have to use. I hoped he'd figure it out. I took a slow sip of the dark, bitter coffee. It tasted like resolve. I looked out the window at the sprawling city below, a city I had helped shape with steel and concrete. "So did I, Monica," I replied, my voice low and even. "But the sun has officially set. It's time to turn off the lights." Monica nodded slowly, her expression turning from concern to the focused, sharp look of a master chess player, seeing the board clearly. "All right, Mal, walk me through it. I know the legal structures we built, but I need to hear the human part. What was the final straw?" I stared into my coffee mug, seeing the reflection of the man my son had called a loser. He said the word Monica. He said it out loud in public. He called me a loser and called Carter, Lorraine's new husband, a winner. And Lorraine just sat there and let him. I looked up from the mug and met her eyes. He believes it. He honestly believes the world he lives in is one he created. Today, we begin the process of showing him the truth of the foundations he's standing on. Monica leaned forward, all business. "Now let's review the assets. Let's start with the heart of his so-called empire, DR Tech Solutions." I let out a long, slow breath. "Darius always had ambition," I began, my voice a low rumble. "I'll give him that. He had big ideas, big dreams. He wanted to be the next tech mogul out of Chicago. But he had no discipline, no patience, and no money. He came to me about 6 years ago with a half-baked proposal for a software company. It was full of buzzwords and projections that had no basis in reality. I knew if I gave him the money directly, he'd burn through it in a year and learn nothing." I paused, remembering the hopeful, greedy look in his eyes that day. He didn't want a father's guidance. He wanted a bank. So, I decided to give him one, just not in the way he expected. I told him I couldn't help, that my money was tied up in safe, boring retirement funds. He was so disappointed he called me old-fashioned. Monica picked up the narrative, her legal mind filling in the details. "And that's when you came to me. We set up the silent trust funded with $2 million, based in Delaware for maximum anonymity. Then we created a shell venture capital firm, Forward Arc Capital Group, based out of California. We hired a frontman, a retired professor, to be the face of it. As far as Darius knows, he was discovered by a group of forward-thinking West Coast investors who saw his genius." I nodded. He was so proud. He flew to San Francisco, pitched his idea, and walked out with a check. He never once questioned why it was so easy. He thought it was his destiny. He never stopped to wonder who truly owned Forward Arc. And the ownership structure of DR Tech Solutions reflects that. Monica continued, pulling up a file on her tablet. 60% of the shares are held by Forward Arc Capital Group, which is wholly owned by your anonymous trust. 20% are held by Darius's CEO, and the other 20% are reserved for future employees. You have complete controlling interest, Mal. He isn't the owner of that company. He is its highest paid employee, and his board of directors is, for all intents and purposes, you. Next, we move to the symbols of his success. The car, I said, the word tasting like ash. The BMW 7 Series. He had to have it. He said it was essential for projecting success to clients and investors. My boy, who used to be happy with a well-maintained Ford, was now convinced the German engineering of his car was a reflection of his own worth. Another easy one, Monica said, swiping on her screen. He tried to get a lease in his own name, but his personal credit was too thin, so he had the company lease it for him. Or so he thinks. Explain, I said, though I knew the answer perfectly. The lease isn't with DR Tech Solutions, she clarified. It's with a separate entity we created for asset management, Ridgeway Holdings LLC. We presented it to Darius as a third-party fleet management company that DR Tech would contract with for executive vehicles. He signed the paperwork without a second thought, happy to get his shiny new toy. The contract explicitly states that the vehicle is provided for the use of a designated employee of DR Tech. The moment he is no longer an employee, the car is no longer his to use. I finished. The irony was corrosive. My holding company, a name he wouldn't even recognize, providing the chariot for my winter son. He was driving my car, paid for with my money, all while calling me a failure. Finally, we come to the biggest piece, the foundation of it all, I said softly. The penthouse. Monica's expression softened for a moment. This one always felt different, Mal. It was, I admitted. This was about Lorraine as much as it was about Darius. After she left me for Carter, she became obsessed with appearances. She filled Darius's head with the idea that where you live defines who you are. He and Tiana searched for months for the perfect apartment, something that would make their friends jealous. They found the penthouse at the Harborview. The Harborview is a beautiful pre-war building that had recently been renovated, a perfect blend of classic architecture and modern luxury. Darius fell in love with it. He told me about it, complaining that it was just out of his price range. He asked if I could help with the security deposit. I told him no. I told him it was reckless to live beyond his means. Monica smiled faintly. And what you didn't tell him was that you had bought the entire building 3 years prior. It was an undervalued asset in a neighborhood primed for revival. The old engineer and me taking over, I explained. The numbers made sense. I purchased it through another LLC, Harborview Properties. It was a good, solid investment. It was brilliant, Monica corrected. When Darius applied for the penthouse, the landlord, a property management firm we hired, contacted him with a special offer. They said they were looking for a high-profile tenant, like a tech CEO, to add prestige to the building, and they were willing to offer him an employee incentive lease. His rent is virtually zero. He just pays the building fees. He signed it, bragging for weeks that the landlord was so impressed with him that he got the deal of a lifetime. He never read the fine print. I said. No one ever does, Monica confirmed. The fine print, of course, states that the incentive lease is contingent on his continued employment with DR Tech Solutions. It also states that the property management firm can terminate the lease with 72 hours notice for any breach of contract. And the contract defines a breach as anything that might bring the building's name into disrepute. So there it was. The whole house of cards laid out on Monica's expensive oak desk. His company, his car, his home. Every pillar of his life was a carefully constructed illusion designed, funded, and owned by the father he called a loser. He wasn't a self-made man. He was a trust fund baby who had never been told the truth. He has nothing, I said, the weight of the words settling in the room. Everything he thinks is his is actually mine. Monica leaned back, her work done for the moment. So, Mal, what is your first move? According to the protocol, the first step is always symbolic. I thought about the arrogant look on my son's face, the way he gestured with his hand that wore a watch I paid for, driving a car I owned to go home to an apartment I provided. The car, I said without hesitation. We start with the car. A winner shouldn't have to ride the bus. Monica made a note on her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "The car it is," she confirmed, her voice now devoid of any emotion except professional focus. "A tow truck can be dispatched to his residence by 9 a.m. Monday morning, citing the termination of the corporate lease agreement. It will be swift and entirely legal. But what's the larger strategy, Mal? What's the timeline? Do we hit him with everything at once? The car, the corporate accounts, the eviction notice. We can have it all done by noon on Monday if you want a full-scale blitz." I shook my head slowly, looking past her out at the skyline I knew so well. "No," I said. "That's not the way. That's destruction. That's revenge. And this isn't about revenge." "What is it about?" she asked gently. I turned my gaze back to her, trying to find the right words. I thought about my life's work, about the physics of structures and the integrity of foundations. When you need to bring down a building, Monica, you don't just set off dynamite at the base. That's messy, unpredictable. It sends shrapnel everywhere and hurts innocent people. It's an act of pure destruction. I leaned forward, my hands clasped in front of me. A true engineer, a builder, does it differently. You perform a controlled demolition. You dismantle it piece by piece. You remove the fixtures first, the shiny things that catch the eye. Then you take out the windows, his view of the world. Then you carefully remove the floors one by one until all that's left is the empty frame and the bare foundation. I don't want to destroy my son, Monica. I want to dismantle the false life he's living. I want him to stand on the cold, hard foundation of reality and finally understand what it takes to build something real for himself. Monica listened, her eyes never leaving mine. She understood. She wasn't just my lawyer. She was the daughter of a carpenter. She knew the language of building and breaking. "A controlled demolition," she repeated, a new understanding dawning in her expression. "It's legally cleaner, too. Each action is a separate, justifiable corporate or property management decision. No single action can be construed as a coordinated personal attack. It's airtight." "Exactly," I said. "So, we start with the car on Monday, the symbol of his status. We give him a day to feel that loss, to feel the inconvenience. Then on Tuesday, you freeze the corporate accounts. You cut off his power. Let him feel what it's like when the well runs dry. And Carter Hale's consulting payments along with it. Let the winner feel the pinch, too." I took a deep breath before delivering the final instruction. "Then on Wednesday, when he's confused and powerless, you deliver the eviction notice. You take away his security one piece at a time. Let him feel each wall come down. Let him understand the value of each thing as he loses it." A heavy silence settled in the room. This wasn't a plan born of anger. It was a curriculum. A harsh, painful curriculum. Monica simply nodded. "I understand the lesson plan, Mal. I'll prepare the necessary documents immediately." I stood up, my old bones aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. I had made the decision. Now I just had to live with it. "Thank you, Monica." I walked to the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. "Let it begin," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Let the lesson commence. The rest of that week was perhaps the quietest of my life. After leaving Monica's office, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The decision had been made. The plan was in motion. There was nothing left to do but wait for the gears to turn. I spent Friday and Saturday in my garden. My rose bushes needed pruning, a task I usually enjoyed, but now it took on a new solemn purpose. My hands, calloused from a lifetime of work, moved with practiced precision. Snip, a dead branch fell away. Snip, an overgrown shoot that was stealing nutrients from the main stem. I thought about what I was doing. Gardening is an exercise in ruthless compassion. You can't be sentimental about the parts of a plant that are weak or diseased. If you let them grow, they will eventually poison the whole bush. You have to cut them back, sometimes almost to the stalk, to give the plant a chance to grow back stronger and healthier. I was just the gardener doing the hard, necessary work. My son was a magnificent plant that had become overgrown with the weeds of entitlement and arrogance. I was pruning him back to save what was still alive underneath. On Saturday afternoon, my phone buzzed on the small wooden bench beside me. I picked it up. Darius's name glowed on the screen. A week ago, my heart would have leapt. I would have answered immediately, ready to absorb whatever casual disrespect he threw my way, just to hear his voice. Now, I simply looked at his name. I watched it flash again and again, a desperate digital cry. Then I placed the phone face down on the bench and went back to my roses. An hour later, it buzzed again. This time it was Lorraine. I didn't even bother to look. Her silence at the dinner table had been her answer. My silence was now mine. That evening, I sat in my worn leather armchair, a place I had spent countless hours reading. I wasn't reading a thriller or a mystery. I was rereading a biography of Ulysses S. Grant, not the general, but the president. A man who was quiet, underestimated, and constantly battling the corruption of those around him. I came across a passage about his steadfastness, his ability to absorb blows and criticism without flinching, all while focusing on the larger strategic goal. He wasn't flashy. He was solid. He dealt not in opinions, but in outcomes. I closed the book and thought about the word Darius had used, loser. He saw my quiet life, my modest home, my old car, and he saw a man who had lost at the game of life. He never saw the foundations. He never understood that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. Darius, Lorraine, and Carter were playing checkers, fast, noisy, and shallow. They never realized I'd been playing chess, quietly, positioning my pieces for a checkmate that had been decided 10 moves ago. Sunday was even quieter. I attended church, the same small Baptist church I'd been going to for over 40 years. I listened to the sermon on accountability and consequence. I felt a sense of clarity, not guilt. I was holding my son accountable. I was delivering the consequences he had earned. After the service, I spent the afternoon in my workshop, sanding down a piece of old oak, the rhythmic motion calming my soul. The phone remained on the kitchen counter, silent now. They had likely given up, assuming I was sulking. They had no idea. As dusk fell, I sat on my back porch, watching the sun dip below the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in hues of orange and deep violet. The air grew cool. The weekend was over, my final quiet weekend before the storm. I thought of the name Monica, and I had given the plan, the Sunset Protocol. It was fitting. The sun was setting on my son's life as he knew it, and tomorrow morning, with the dawn, his harsh, necessary education would begin. I felt no joy, only a profound, heavy certainty. The lesson was coming. While I spent my weekend in quiet contemplation, my son, as I would later piece together from a series of frantic voicemails and tearful confessions, spent his in a cacophony of self-congratulation. While I was pruning my roses, he was on the phone with one of his friends, laughing as he drove his BMW down Lakeshore Drive, the city skyline blurring past his window. "Dude, you should have seen his face," Darius had said, his voice booming through the car's Bluetooth speakers. I finally just told him the truth, called him a loser right to his face. Yeah, he just got up and walked out. Total drama queen. What's he gonna do? You know, he'll get over it. He always does. He saw my lifetime of patience not as a gift, but as weakness. He saw my silence not as a warning, but as surrender. That evening, while I was reading about President Grant, Darius and Tiana were in their penthouse, scrolling through a website for luxury watches on Tiana's tablet. She had pointed to a gold one with a diamond bezel. "Should I get it, babe? It's a little extravagant," she teased. Darius had scoffed. "Of course you should. We deserve it, especially after the way my dad acted at dinner. Honestly, I think we need to treat ourselves after that embarrassment." In his mind, he was the victim. My quiet departure had been an act of aggression against him, a social faux pas that required retail therapy to overcome. He had no capacity to see his own cruelty. His world was a mirror, and all it showed was his own reflection. He had even called Carter, seeking praise for his brave performance. Carter, ever the opportunist, supplied it in abundance. "You did the right thing, Darius," the man had said, his voice smooth as oil. "Sometimes you have to set firm boundaries with people from a different generation, people who don't understand the mindset of a winner." "Thanks, Carter," Darius replied, his voice full of warmth he hadn't used with me in years. "It's just good to finally have a real role model to look up to." A real role model. A man whose entire consulting business consisted of a single inflated contract with a company I owned. The irony was a bitter pill. That weekend, Darius likely stood by the wide glass window of his penthouse, looking out at the glowing city below. The lights of Chicago spread out like a jeweled carpet. He believed he was on top of the world he had built with his own brilliance. He probably thought of me, the old man in his dusty house, and felt a pang of what he mistook for pity. He probably thought, he'll come around. He always does. He's got nothing else. But he was wrong. I did have something else. I had a plan. And the time for waiting was over. It was Sunday night, 10 p.m. The weekend was done. My house was dark except for the single lamp that cast a warm glow on the oak desk in my study. The quiet in the house was different now. It was no longer the calm after a decision, but the tense, electric silence before a storm. The fuse had been lit on Friday, and it had been burning slowly, silently, all weekend. Now it was nearing the powder keg. I wasn't pacing. I was sitting in my leather armchair, the biography of Grant resting in my lap, my eyes closed. I was listening, waiting. At precisely 10:01 p.m., a soft chime echoed from my old Dell computer. An email notification. I didn't rush. I took a deep breath, placed my book carefully on the side table, and rose from my chair. I walked to the desk, the wooden floorboards creaking softly under my weight. The screen was bright in the dark room. A single new email sat in my inbox. The sender was Monica Ellis. The subject line was simply, "Update." I moved the mouse and clicked it open. The body of the email was stark white, containing only 6 words standing alone in the center of the screen like a command. The first domino has been pushed. Monday morning dawned bright and loud. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Darius's penthouse, glinting off polished chrome and marble. For him, the world still felt perfect. He had no idea that by noon, it would begin to fall apart. Monday morning dawned bright and loud, sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harborview penthouse, glinting off polished marble counters and stainless steel fixtures. For Darius, the world still felt perfect. The weekend had been, in his mind, a triumph. He had finally put his father in his place, asserting his role as the family's new alpha. He woke up humming, stretching in crisp linen sheets before swinging his legs out of bed. The city skyline glittered below, like an obedient audience. In his mind, this was what winning looked like. He showered, shaved, and slipped into a tailored navy suit that cost more than I used to spend on a month's mortgage. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, Tiana padded out from the bedroom in a silk robe, coffee in hand. "You look sharp, baby," she said, leaning against the doorframe with a lazy smile. "Always," he said, smirking at his reflection. "Got a lunch with new potential clients today. Gotta make an impression." "You sure you don't want me to drive you?" "I've got the Benz," she offered, sipping her coffee. "I have that spa appointment at 11 anyway." He chuckled, straightening his cufflinks. "Nah, I'll take the Beamer. You know how it is. Image is everything." He leaned in, kissed her cheek, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. "Besides," he whispered, "we've earned the right to show off a little. We're winners, remember?" She giggled and swatted his arm. "Go on, big shot. Don't keep your empire waiting." Feeling on top of the world, Darius grabbed his leather briefcase and headed for the private elevator that led directly to the residence garage. The ride down was smooth and silent. The chrome doors slid open with a soft chime. And there it was, his car, his prize, his identity. The black BMW 7 Series gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights like a sleek predator. The badge on the hood, the hum of the engine, the smell of leather, all of it screamed success. He pressed the key fob. The headlights blinked in greeting, but then he froze. A large, grimy tow truck was parked directly behind his car, its yellow hazard lights flashing rhythmically, casting an ugly pulse of light across the pristine garage. A man in greasy blue overalls was crouched beside the rear tire, securing a thick metal chain. Darius's perfect morning shattered in an instant. "Hey," he barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "What the hell do you think you're doing? This is a private garage. You can't park here." The man stood up slowly. He was large, with calloused hands and a blank, weathered face that spoke of long hours and little patience. "You Darius Ridgway?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. "I am," Darius snapped, puffing out his chest. "And you're about to get your rust bucket towed if you don't move it in the next 10 seconds. You're blocking my car." The tow driver didn't move. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and gestured toward the BMW. "No, sir. I'm not blocking your car. I'm here to repossess it." For a moment, Darius just stared at him, dumbfounded. Then he laughed, sharp and incredulous. "Repossess it? Are you joking? This car is paid for. It's a corporate lease. You've obviously got the wrong guy." The driver sighed, as if he'd had this same conversation 1,000 times. He pulled a clipboard from the cab of his truck and held it out. "Work order says black BMW 7 Series, license plate VTR, 829, leased under Darius Ridgway. That you?" Darius's face flushed. "Yes, that's me. But there's been a mistake, a stupid one." "Who sent you?" "DR Tech Solutions. Because I own that company, and I can assure you, we haven't missed a single payment." The driver pointed a greasy finger at the paper. "Order's not from DR Tech, sir. It's from the title holder, Ridgway Holdings LLC." The name meant nothing to him. His relief turned to renewed fury. "See, I told you, you've got the wrong file. I've never heard of that company. It's a clerical error. Now get your truck out of here before I call security." The driver didn't argue. He just gave a slow shake of his head, a flicker of pity crossing his eyes. "Sir, I've got a legal repossession order. If you got a problem, take it up with the leasing company." He turned his back and began tightening the chain. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the garage, like a hammer striking Darius's ego. "Hey, get your hands off my car!" Darius shouted, his voice cracking. He yanked his phone from his pocket and dialed the leasing company number, his hand trembling. He could feel eyes on him from across the garage, residents walking by, pretending not to stare but enjoying the spectacle. After an agonizing wait through automated menus, a calm female voice answered. "Premier Executive Leasing, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you?" "My name is Darius Ridgway," he snapped. "You've made a massive mistake. You sent a tow truck to repossess my car, a BMW 7 Series. I need you to call it off right now." There was a pause, followed by the sound of rapid typing. "I see your account, Mr. Ridgway," she said in that infuriatingly calm tone. "Yes, the BMW 7 Series. It appears the repossession order was issued this morning at 8:05 a.m. "I know it was issued," he barked. "I'm telling you it's wrong." "I'm not seeing any mistake in the system," Sarah replied evenly. "The lease agreement was terminated by the owner of the vehicle, Ridgway Holdings LLC." His brain stuttered. "I've never heard of Ridgway Holdings. The lease is through my company, DR Tech Solutions." "I can see that DR Tech was the authorized user," she continued. "But Ridgway Holdings LLC is the legal owner and lessor of the vehicle. As the owner, they have the right to terminate the lease at any time per Section 4, Paragraph B of your agreement." He felt dizzy. "Put me through to someone at Ridgway Holdings. I'll clear this up directly." "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice soft but final. "We don't have a public contact number for that entity. All communications are handled through their legal representatives. We've fulfilled our obligations by acting on their request. This matter is now closed." "Closed?" he shouted, but she'd already hung up. The driver, unfazed, finished hooking up the chains. The car's front wheels lifted slowly off the ground. The sight of it, his precious BMW dangling helplessly in the air, made something collapse inside him. "Stop! You can't do this!" he screamed. But the driver climbed into his cab and started the engine. The deep rumble of the diesel truck drowned out his fury. Darius stood there, helpless, as the tow truck backed up. The car's tires scraped along the concrete, a pathetic whine echoing off the walls. Then, just like that, the truck turned the corner and was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. The smell of diesel fumes lingered in the air. Darius stood there in his $1,000 suit and Italian loafers, staring at the empty space where his car had been. For the first time in years, He looked small, powerless. He didn't know it yet, but the first pillar of his world had just been ripped away. And while he stood in that garage, trying to make sense of what had just happened, I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee and watching the morning light glint off the wet petals of my roses. The first domino had fallen. By 9:30, Monica had texted me a simple confirmation: vehicle reclaimed without incident. I replied with one word: proceed. The plan was working exactly as designed. Across town, Darius ordered an Uber, a $100 ride in rush hour traffic. He sat in the back seat, fuming, scrolling through his phone. He couldn't shake the humiliation of that tow truck driver's blank stare, the way people had looked at him. But worse than that was the thought that he couldn't just buy his way out of it. He told himself it was just a mistake, a clerical error. By the afternoon, it would all be sorted out. But by the time he reached his office tower, the glass monument to his supposed success, the second domino was already tilting. When Darius's Uber pulled up to the sleek glass facade of DR Tech Solutions, he felt a flicker of relief. The morning had been humiliating, yes, but in his mind, it was an isolated incident, a mistake he could fix. He would get to the office, call his finance manager, and sort it all out. He was still in control. The doorman at the lobby nodded to him, the same polite half-smile as always, but Darius imagined something different in it now. Amusement, maybe pity. His mind was already inventing enemies. He strode across the marble lobby, the click of his Italian loafers sharp and fast, an overcompensation for the unease twisting inside him. The office was on the 22nd floor, open plan, minimalist, full of glass walls and the hum of machines. He loved it here, the feeling of power, of being in motion. His employees greeted him as he entered, though this morning their smiles were tight, uncertain. "Morning, boss," one of the interns said weakly. "Morning," Darius replied, loosening his tie and forcing his trademark grin. "Let's make it a productive one, huh?" He moved straight to his private office, a sleek room with a view of the Chicago River. He dropped his briefcase onto the desk and powered up his computer. The screen flickered to life, then went black, then flickered again. A gray login screen appeared with a red notice across the top. "Access revoked. Please contact administrator." He frowned. What the hell? He rebooted, typed in his password again. Same message. He grabbed his phone and called IT. "Yeah, hey Greg, this is Darius. My computer's locked me out. Can you fix that?" There was a pause on the line, then Greg's hesitant voice. Mr. Ridgway, I was actually just about to call you. We've had a company-wide issue this morning. All admin level accounts have been disabled." "All admin level accounts?" Darius repeated. "By who?" "Well, sir," Greg said carefully, "the request came from the majority stakeholder." Darius frowned. "The what?" "The controlling shareholders, sir. Forward Arc Capital Group. Their legal representative sent a notice early this morning instructing us to restrict access until further review." He blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious. I am the CEO. You can't lock me out of my own system." "I understand, sir," Greg stammered. "But legally, I have to comply. Until we get authorization from their office, I can't restore your access." Darius gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles whitening. "Forward Arc? That's a formality. They're investors, not owners. This company exists because of me." "I'm sorry, Mr. Ridgway," Greg said again, his voice small. "I just follow the instructions I'm given." The line went dead. Darius threw his phone onto the desk and sank into his chair. The view of the river outside looked suddenly cold, distant. He felt a tightness in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation, helplessness. He turned his gaze toward the photograph on his desk. Him and Tiana at the launch party, champagne in hand, grinning beneath a banner that read DR Tech Solutions, innovating the future. He believed it, every word of it. Now, for the first time, he wondered if any of it had ever been real. He stood abruptly and stormed out of his office. His assistant, Maya, nearly jumped out of her chair. "Sir, get me the company bank account rep on the phone," he snapped. "Now." "Of course," she said, scrambling to dial. He paced back and forth until the call connected. "This is Mark from Continental Bank." came a smooth voice over the line. "This is Darius Ridgway, CEO of DR Tech Solutions," Darius said sharply. "I need to know why my company funds are inaccessible. My CFO says our business account was frozen this morning." "Yes, Mr. Ridgway," Mark replied calmly. "I see the account in question. The freeze order was issued by the controlling entity of record, Forward Arc Capital Group. It's a standard security measure pending audit." "Pending audit? What audit?" "It's in compliance with the Section 47 review clause of your investment agreement, sir. When the majority shareholder suspects financial irregularities, they have the right to temporarily restrict fund access pending review." "There are no irregularities," Darius shouted, his voice rising. "That's my company." "Not according to the paperwork, sir," Mark said, his voice still maddeningly polite. "You're listed as a minority shareholder and executive officer, not owner. If you have documentation proving otherwise, you can submit it for review." Darius went silent. He didn't have documentation. He'd signed every contract Forward Arc sent him without reading beyond the bolded summary. He trusted them completely. He'd even bragged about how his investors didn't micromanage. Now he realized they hadn't needed to. They'd owned him from day one. He slammed the phone down so hard that Maya flinched. The sound echoed through the open office. A few heads turned, whispers rippled. "Cancel my meetings," he barked, stalking toward the elevator. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stay there. The walls of his office, glass, transparent, gleaming, suddenly felt like they were closing in, suffocating him with his own reflection. As he rode the elevator down, he tried calling Tiana. No answer. He texted her, "We have a problem. Call me." She didn't respond. When he stepped outside into the bright Chicago sunlight, it hit him like a slap. The sounds of the city, horns, chatter, the rush of traffic, were too loud, too alive. He stood there on the sidewalk, momentarily adrift, like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. A vibration in his pocket startled him. His phone buzzed again, a new email notification. He opened it. From Forward Arc Capital Legal Subject. Temporary suspension of executive privileges, dear Mr. Ridgway. Effective immediately. All executive privileges and access to company accounts, systems, and decision-making processes are suspended pending a comprehensive audit of DR Tech Solutions' financial operations. Please direct all correspondence through legal counsel. Any attempt to override or interfere with ongoing procedures will be considered a breach of contract. Forward Arc Capital Legal Division. He read it twice, his eyes tracing the black text as if looking for a secret code that would make it make sense. There was none. It was simple, final. He looked up and saw his reflection in the glass facade of the building. The confident man he thought he was had vanished. What stared back was hollow-eyed and uncertain, a man standing in the wreckage of his own delusion. A voice inside him, small and trembling, whispered a thought he'd never allowed before. What if Dad was right? He tried to crush it immediately, but it stayed. As he walked away from the building, his phone buzzed again. Another email. This one from Tiana. Subject, "We need to talk." He opened it quickly, expecting comfort or at least concern. Instead, it was a single paragraph. "Darius, I don't know what's going on, but the building management just called. Something about changes to the lease. They said the apartment's listed under a corporate incentive program that's being terminated. We might have to leave by Wednesday. Call me." For the first time that day, his legs nearly gave out. He stopped right there on the busy sidewalk, people brushing past him, their lives continuing uninterrupted while his was quietly unraveling. He scrolled through the email again, reading it 3 times, 4, 5. Each repetition made it more real. The penthouse, the company, the car. One by one, the walls of his life were falling. And somewhere across town, in a modest brick home, shaded by an old elm tree, I sat at my desk, reading the same message from Monica confirming Step 2. Corporate audit initiated. Accounts frozen. Phase 2 complete. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, weary sigh. The second domino had fallen. But this wasn't joy I felt. It was gravity. The weight of cause and consequence. Each click of the machine I'd set in motion was bringing my son closer to understanding, and me closer to the truth of whether I'd done the right thing. Because dismantling a man's illusion was easy. What came next, what would rise from the ruins, would be the real test. By Tuesday morning, the sky over Chicago had turned the color of steel. Heavy clouds gathered above the skyline, casting long shadows across the glass towers. The weather matched the atmosphere of my thoughts, heavy, deliberate, inevitable. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, my old Dell open before me. The inbox showed one new message. From Monica. Subject, Step 3, Authorization Request. I clicked it. Harborview Properties prepared to execute early lease termination per Clause 9B. Please confirm before noon. Standard notice period, 72 hours. That was the third domino. The final wall of Darius's illusion, his home, ready to fall. I stared at the message for a long while. My finger hovered over the mouse. One click, and my son would lose everything material he had ever used to define himself. But that was the point, wasn't it? To strip him down to what was real. Still, the father in me hesitated. The engineer wanted precision. The man wanted mercy. I picked up my phone and called Monica. She answered on the first ring. "Morning, Mal," she said softly, as if she could sense the weight in my voice. "Morning," I replied. "You're sure this is the right move?" "Legally? Absolutely. Morally?" She hesitated. "That's between you and God." I let out a dry chuckle. He and I have been having some long talks lately. "You designed this plan," she said gently. "You said yourself it wasn't about revenge. It's about education. If you stop now, he'll never understand what you were trying to teach him. He'll just think you flinched." She was right. The hardest lessons were the ones that hurt. "Proceed," I said finally. "Consider it done." When she hung up, I sat there in silence. The house felt different that morning, heavier somehow. Even the ticking of the clock on the wall seemed slower, like time itself was holding its breath. I didn't leave for work. I didn't need to. My career had long since shifted from building physical structures to consulting on the projects of others, younger engineers who still believed they could build forever. My work was mostly behind the scenes now, a quiet architect of stability. By 10:15 a.m., the message had gone out from Harborview's management office. The email was addressed to Mr. Darius Ridgway and Mrs. Tiana Ridgway. Subject, termination of corporate lease. Harborview Penthouse 4201. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ridgway, this notice serves to inform you that the corporate incentive lease for your residence, Unit 4201 at the Harborview building, has been terminated effective immediately. The termination is pursuant to Clause 9B of your agreement, allowing the property owner to withdraw incentive housing for reasons of administrative restructuring. You are required to vacate the premises within 72 hours of this notice. Building management will be in contact to facilitate move-out procedures. Failure to comply will result in legal enforcement. Sincerely, Harborview Properties, LLC. The moment that email landed in his inbox, my son's world began its final collapse. Darius was in his penthouse kitchen when his phone buzzed. He'd spent most of the night pacing, trying to make sense of the chaos that had descended on his life. The car repossession, the frozen accounts, the humiliating calls to his employees, who could no longer access payroll. All of it had left him sleepless, his nerves frayed. Tiana had barely spoken to him since the night before. When she wasn't crying, she was texting her mother. She'd accused him of hiding debts, of lying about their finances. He had shouted back that it wasn't his fault, that someone was sabotaging him. Now, as the morning light filtered through the tall windows, she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her face tight with anger. "Darius," she said without looking up, "you should probably check your email." He froze. "Why? Just check it." Her tone was cold, clipped. He walked to the counter, picked up his phone, and opened his inbox. The message from Harborview was at the top. As he read, his hands began to shake. "No," he whispered. No. What is it?" Tiana demanded, standing up. "They're terminating our lease," he said, his voice rising. "They're saying we have to leave by Friday." Her eyes widened. You're joking. He shoved the phone toward her. Do I look like I'm joking? She read it quickly, her face going pale. What does corporate incentive lease even mean? I thought this was our place, Darius. You told me you bought it. I did, he lied instinctively. Well, technically, the company did, but the company. She interrupted, her voice climbing. The same company that's frozen and under audit? Oh my God, are you telling me we don't actually own this place? I didn't know, he shouted. This has to be some kind of mistake. I'll call the landlord. But when he tried, the call went straight to voicemail. He sent 3 emails, all unanswered. By noon, 2 uniformed building managers appeared at their door with polite, professional smiles and printed papers confirming the termination notice. I'm sorry, Mr. Ridgway, one of them said. It's out of our hands. You'll have 72 hours to vacate. If you need moving assistance, we can recommend a service. Tiana stared at them in disbelief. You're throwing us out. It's not personal, ma'am, the man said kindly. It's corporate. When the door closed behind them, the silence that filled the room was suffocating. Tiana turned to him, her eyes blazing. You lied to me. I didn't. You lied, she screamed. Everything. The car, the company, this place. It's all built on lies. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't touch me, she said, her voice trembling. I'm leaving. Tiana, I mean it. I can't do this. You've embarrassed me, Darius. My parents warned me. He stood there, frozen, as she grabbed her purse and keys. Where are you going? He asked, though he already knew. Somewhere real, she said quietly. Then she walked out. The door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the empty space, like the final nail in a coffin. Darius sank onto the couch, his mind unraveling. He stared at the city through the wide glass windows, the same city he once thought he owned. Now it looked like an ocean he could drown in. He didn't cry. Not yet. He was too stunned to feel. He sat there until dusk, the light fading into the gray of the storm outside. When the thunder rolled over the skyline, he finally spoke out loud to no one. Dad, he whispered. What did you do? Across town, I sat in my study, listening to the same storm. The rain drummed softly against the window, steady and cleansing. The phone rang once. Monica again. It's done, she said. Lease terminated, notices delivered. He has 72 hours. Thank you, I said quietly. There was a pause. Then she asked, how do you feel? I thought about that for a long time. I feel like a bridge engineer on demolition day, I said finally, watching something he built collapse exactly as designed, satisfied with the precision and sick to his stomach at the noise. She said nothing for a moment. Then softly, you still love him? Of course I do, I replied. That's why I'm doing this. When the call ended, I turned back to my computer and opened an old folder on the desktop. Photos, Darius' childhood. There he was, age 6, holding a toy hammer, pretending to fix the porch railing beside me. Another photo, age 10, his first science fair, standing proudly beside a model bridge he'd built from balsa wood. Back then, he looked up to me like I hung the moon. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling slightly. The third domino had fallen. My son had nothing left to lean on. But the lesson wasn't over yet. The final stage of the Sunset Protocol wasn't about loss. It was about confrontation, because the only way to rebuild after demolition is to face the ruins and decide what's worth saving. Wednesday evening arrived wrapped in thunder and the scent of wet asphalt. Chicago's skyline shimmered beneath sheets of rain, each lightning flash illuminating the city like a strobe. I stood by my study window, watching the storm roll in, knowing another one was brewing across town inside the penthouse that no longer belonged to my son. I didn't need to imagine the scene. I knew it. The empty echo of footsteps across polished floors, the suitcases half-packed, the phone calls unanswered. I knew because I had lived my own version of it years ago when Brenda left. The difference was that back then, I'd lost everything I loved. Darius had only lost everything he thought he loved. By 9 that night, the house phone rang, the old landline, the one that rarely made a sound anymore. I knew before I picked it up who it was. Hello, I said. A moment of silence, then the ragged sound of his breathing. You! Darius spat. His voice was hoarse, brittle. You did this. The car, the company, the apartment, all of it. You're behind this, aren't you? The accusation wasn't a question, it was a revelation. He'd finally put the pieces together. I let the silence stretch. That same silence he'd mocked in me his whole life. The silence that used to mean submission now carried the weight of truth. Darius, I said calmly, I think it's time we had a talk. He arrived less than 30 minutes later. The sound of the Uber's old engine carried faintly through the rain. No polished BMW this time. No valet waiting at the curb. Just the storm, the dark, and my son stepping out into it, drenched in rain and fury. I didn't go to the door. I waited in my study, the same room where all of this had begun, the command center of the Sunset Protocol. When the doorbell rang, I let it echo once, twice, 3 times before pressing the intercom button. The door's open, Darius, I said. Come to the study. He entered like a man possessed, slamming the door behind him. When he appeared in the doorway, I barely recognized him. His tailored suit was soaked and wrinkled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. The confident, arrogant gleam that had always lived in his eyes was gone, replaced by a wild mix of rage and disbelief. You destroyed my life, he shouted. My company is gone. My car's been repossessed. They kicked me out of my home. My wife left me. And you're sitting here, calm as ever, like none of it matters. I looked up at him without standing. My voice was steady, deliberate. Sit down. I'm not. Sit down. He hesitated. There was something in my tone, the same quiet authority I used to use when teaching him to build, to measure twice before cutting once. He obeyed, collapsing into the chair across from me, breathing hard. The room was silent except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock. I turned my monitor toward him. The screen glowed with a single folder in the center, labeled simply, The Foundation. You said you worked for everything you have. I began, my tone level, almost clinical. Let's review that. I opened the folder. Document after document appeared, incorporation papers, trust declarations, lease contracts. His eyes darted across the screen, confusion twisting into recognition, then horror. 6 years ago, when you pitched your big idea to those venture capitalists in California, Innovate Future Group, do you remember that? I asked. Of course, he said bitterly. They saw my potential. They did, I said, because I instructed them to. He blinked, stunned. What? I clicked open the incorporation document. Innovate Future Group was a shell company created by my attorney, Monica. It was funded entirely through my personal trust. You never knew because that trust was anonymous, hidden behind Delaware registration laws. The same trust that owned your so-called investors, and by extension, your company. His lips parted, but no words came. I continued. Your company, DR Tech Solutions, is 60% owned by that same venture fund. You own 20%, on paper only. The rest is reserved for future employees. A clever phrase for me. You were never the owner, Darius. You were an employee in an empire I built for you to learn from. He shook his head violently. No, that's not possible. It's not only possible, I said. It's legal. Every check you ever deposited, every investor meeting you bragged about, it was all me. The reason your company survived the first year wasn't your leadership. It was the funding I fed into it behind closed doors. Without me, your business would have collapsed before it started. He looked as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. And then, I said, clicking to the next document, there's your car. A lease agreement filled the screen. The header read, Ridgeway Holdings LLC. You told everyone you leased that BMW through the company. You even bragged about how corporate financing was a tax advantage. But you never checked who the actual lessor was. I pointed to the fine print. That's me. My holding company. You were driving my car, Darius. Paid for with my money. The moment you ceased to be an employee of DR Tech Solutions, the lease was void. He swallowed hard, staring at the words like they might rearrange themselves if he glared long enough. And the penthouse, I said softly. Your castle in the sky. He looked up sharply. Don't, but I did. I opened another file, showing the property deed. Oak Ridge Properties, LLC. I read aloud. Another of my companies. I bought the entire building 3 years ago. You weren't a tenant of Prestige. You were a guest in a building I owned. The corporate incentive lease you signed was a fiction. The moment your employment changed, your residence was no longer valid. His voice broke when he spoke again. Why? Why would you do this to me? To show you the truth, I said simply. He looked at me then, really looked, and in his eyes I saw the boy he used to be, the one who once believed the world was made of fairness and effort. I leaned forward. You called me a loser, Darius. You said Richard was a winner. Let's talk about your role model. I opened the final file. Consulting contract, Lawson Enterprises. Richard Lawson's entire business, I said, consists of one client, your company. Every consulting payment you made to him, $50,000 a month, came directly from my trust. I've been paying his mortgage, his cars, your mother's lifestyle. The winner, you idolized lives on the payroll of the man you called a loser. The color drained from his face. He made a small sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, and slumped back in his chair. Everything he believed in had turned to dust in the space of a few minutes. I closed the laptop with a soft click. The sound filled the room like a verdict. I didn't take anything from you, I said quietly. I just reclaimed what was mine. You've spent your life performing success, but you never learned how to build it. You've lived in a world of glass walls, shiny, fragile, hollow. Tonight, I've simply taken away the glass, so you can finally see the foundation. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. After a long silence, I said, now you have a choice. You can rebuild, not the way I did, not the way Richard pretended to, but honestly. You can get a job, pay real rent, learn the worth of $1 that comes from your own labor, or you can keep running from yourself. That's up to you. When I stood, the chair groaned behind me. My knees ached. 72 years will do that, but my resolve didn't waver. He looked up at me, eyes red, mouth trembling. I hate you, he whispered. I nodded slowly. That's fine. One day, maybe, you'll understand that this was love. Then I left him there, sitting alone in the small, dusty study, surrounded by the blueprints of bridges that had outlasted storms. A week later, the house was quiet again. The rain had passed. The sky was a clear, endless blue. I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the air warm and thick with the scent of honeysuckle. The phone rang. It was Brenda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was frantic, almost unrecognizable. Malcolm, you have to help us. Richard's business is gone. They canceled the contract. The bank's foreclosing on the lake house. They're taking the cars. We have nothing. I listened, silent. This is your fault, she shrieked. You were jealous. You wanted revenge. When she finally ran out of words, I said quietly, Brenda, that's no longer my problem. And I hung up. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the slow creak of the wood, the distant hum of cicadas. The world felt peaceful again. For the first time in years, I wasn't holding anyone else's weight. I wasn't a loser. I wasn't a savior. I was simply free. And in that quiet, humid Chicago evening, I finally understood what victory really felt like. Not applause, not wealth, not validation, just peace.